Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Clark Parsons, the Managing Director of the Internet Economy Foundation, and we're really thrilled that you could be with us today for a 1-hour really special panel discussion and discussion with you, hopefully, about the Digital Markets Act of the European Union, as well as the opportunities and risks that it brings for European platforms. This is today a partnership between the French Embassy in Germany, the Internet Economy Foundation, where I'm the Managing Director, and the Startup-Verband, the German Startups Association. So first off, a huge thank you to the teams of all of our organizations at the IF, at the Startup-Verband and the French Embassy. It's been really a team effort to put this together. We only have an hour and we have a lot to talk about, so I'll be really fast. What we'd like to do is have a quick welcome from some of our host organizations and then jump right in to our panel. We have 4 really fantastic guests who I think can represent really the key elements of what's up for debate right now in the Digital Markets Act. And then we, of course, would like to open things up to you. If you've registered, you know that we're using Slido today to answer and curate and upvote questions. And we have hundreds of you registered, so we expect some good questions. So please be thinking as you're hearing the speaker speak. You can put questions up right now already, and we will curate behind the scenes and try and make sure that we can get to as many as possible in the time we have. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Digital Markets Act, a half a sentence about it. It really is the most important piece of legislation possibly for the digital ecosystem of Europe that we'll have this decade. And right now is a crucial time because the French presidency has set a key goal to get the Digital Markets Act across the finish line. And in the process, we are right now at what's called the trilogue, which is where the 3 main parties that are putting this together are in debate. So we're really at a crucial moment for the Digital Markets Act and really thrilled today to be welcoming the guests that we'll have. So I'd first like to kick things off with one of our co-hosts, which is the Ambassador of France to Germany, Ambassador Anne-Marie Descôtes. A couple of words about Ambassador Descôtes. She actually knows Germany quite well. She started, I think, in Bonn as a cultural attaché more than 20 years ago. And since 2017, she has been the Ambassador to France. And I think all of us in the digital realm know what a great friend she has been to the digital industries and has really been a driving force, a great friend to the Startup-Verband, a great friend to the IEF. So, Madam Ambassador, we are delighted to have you say some words of welcome, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
The floor is yours, as they say.
Okay, I just see you, and it's like having a one-to-one conversation.
Fine with me. We'll have a one-to-one conversation with about 200 people listening in. So thank you very much for being our co-host today.
Okay. So I don't know whom I'm speaking to, but I guess it's okay, and I will just start. Yes. First of all, I would like to ladies and gentlemen. I just see me. It's a very strange situation. Could we arrange that in a way? I'm just looking at myself. I don't see anybody.
If you can hear me, you're it. You're going to be the show while you speak.
You're there on the screen. You just disappeared, and I'm looking at myself. So it's a nice. Okay, it's like me in front of a mirror. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, would like to thank the German Startup Association and the Internet Economy Foundation for organizing this event with us around the DMA, Digital Markets Act. Thank you, Mr. Miele. Thank you, Mr. Parsons, for your initiative, which comes, I think, at the right moment. I also want to welcome the distinguished speakers who accepted to bring their perspective, knowledge and experience. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le député, Dr. Schwab. Je remercie Monsieur Weill, chef du service de l'économie numérique au ministère des Finances. Thank you, Ms. Zafairatu. Vice President Corporate Affairs at Zalando. No, I think you are not on the line. It's somebody else. Who is that?
Dr. Enke.
Okay, Dr. Enke. Sorry, and thank you, Dr. Wolfgang Oels, COO at Ecosia. Yeah, as you know, the European Digital Agenda is one of the key components of our agenda, the French presidency of the European Union. And we are really determined to get some results on this issue. Digital economy is transforming our life, all production sectors, and is at the heart of global innovation, successfully creating growth, new jobs on the continent, and successfully defending our values and principles means succeeding in developing a digital Europe. One of the major aims of the French presidency is to build a fully sovereign Europe, particularly in the digital field. One of the main lines of actions in the digital sector is to be able to define the rules of for the digital world ourselves, not being subject to rules imposed by others and avoiding being subject to rules from third powers, either governmental or private institutions. We have already succeeded in designing a European regulation for the protection of individual data, the GDPR, which has even become an international standard. We must continue this work for our citizens as well as for our companies, and because the law requires us to do so, as evidenced by the Schrems II ruling of the EU Court of Justice in July 2020. The European Digital Agenda we promote is broad. It is about achieving a real single digital market based on common rules, capable of attracting talents, promoting funding for our startups. Several legislations or projects are on the negotiating table. As you know, the cloud, artificial intelligence, NIS, cybersecurity, DMA, DSA, and standardization. So today we'll discuss on the DMA. DMA aims to put an end to the unfair practices of large digital platforms, so-called gatekeepers, as well as to make digital markets more open and more competitive. It is a methodological revolution. Until now, the Commission had to conduct lengthy investigation with uncertain outcomes to force the large platforms to give up their unfair practices. With the DMA, these practices will now be automatically illegal without requiring these lengthy investigations to prove so. By preventing ex-ante the digital giants from abusing their dominant position, the DMA is an unprecedented act of economic regulation on the digital sector. This text, along with other important texts such as the DSA, Digital Services Act, is one of the priorities of the French presidency, as I said. So Germany is, of course, a key partner in this endeavor, and we share broadly the same views and concerns. The coalition agreement of the new federal government provides a clear support for the DMA with a high level of ambitions, particularly with regard to existing national regulations. We are now in the very delicate phase of the trilogue, where the presidency needs to help reach a compromise. France aims at an agreement on DMA and DSA before the end of June, and push forward as much as possible, as well as the other pieces of legislation. So time is of essence, as in the digital world. The French State Secretary Cédric O was in Berlin last week to coordinate closely with his German counterparts. French Economics and Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire, together with his German colleagues Christian Lindner and Robert Habeck, launched on the 8th of February a European Funds of Funds for Scale-ups. You might have heard of it. And I'm sure your discussions will contribute to help this very important regulation to be adopted in the coming weeks by the European Parliament, Council, and the Commission after the trilogue I mentioned. So I'm very pleased to open this virtual conference and wish you and us fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Madam Ambassador Descôtes. We're really thrilled and also grateful for the leadership that you've also shown in the digital realm, but especially that the French government and the French presidency has shown. As you mentioned, many of us also in the Berlin ecosystem are really thrilled about the steps that have been taken with Scale Up Europe and these funding mechanisms. So congratulations to that. Second, welcoming remarks now will come from Christian Miele, who's the chairman of the German Startups Association. Those of you in the Startup Federation, of course, know Christian. He's been leading the association since 2019 as the chair. And those of you also in the VC world know Christian as one of the more dynamic VCs in the ecosystem. He's a partner at the global venture firm Headline, formerly eVentures. And of course, many of us admire the fact that Christian, with the last name of one of the great Mittelstand firmen in Germany, is one of the great bridge builders to what we might call the old economy and the new economy. So Christian, we're delighted to have you also as a co-host today. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Clark. Also, thank you very much, Madam Ambassador Descôtes, for your welcoming and warm words. It's a great honor for the German Startup Association and me personally to co-host this event together with you, the Ambassador of France in Germany, and of course, our friends from the Internet Economy Foundation. So thank you so much for this. France and Germany, and the ambassador knows it, are united by a very deep friendship, and I keep repeating myself on that. For us, there is no better friend and partner and international partner than our beloved neighbor from France. That is why I'm pleased to join France today to talk about what is currently one of the most important and pressing issues for the startup ecosystem in Europe, the Digital Markets Act. We can be glad that the final phase of this legislative process and its conclusion falls within the French EU Council Presidency, because France and Germany are countries in Europe with the most vital and largest startup ecosystems. The European Tech Champions Initiative is proof that the French EU Council Presidency is aware of the importance of startups, and this hopefully can help us to give the perspective of startups and scale-ups more weight in the negotiations and the final agreements of the Digital Markets Act. After all, it is precisely these companies that have great potential and the importance for the future competitiveness and sovereignty of our continent. I guess everybody, the startups, the established economy, and the EU member states and the EU institutions are united in the goal of enabling true European digital champions. In order to achieve this, we have to create a level playing field for tech companies. For European tech companies and also, of course, for tech companies from other parts in the world. We must be able to guarantee fair competition and take measures to restore and secure it in the long term wherever it is threatened. The DMA pursues precisely this goal, which is why we put so much importance to it. Nevertheless, we need to take a look at the standards it contains and identify and eliminate potential shortcomings even before it is adopted. If we don't do this, the DMA misses the goal, or even worse, it could make the existing inequalities in the competition even worse. For example, if we need to talk about the scope of the regulation to avoid lumping together companies with different business models. Also, we have to ensure a comprehensive and enforceable prohibition of self-preferencing. I'm firmly convinced that the French EU presidency will manage to solve those challenges in the final stages of the regulation and the regulatory process. With today's event, we want to contribute to making the DMA a great success for the European continent. Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time and your willingness to work with the Internet Economy Foundation and us to host this event. To everybody who's watching in right now, I wish you an exciting discussion and many new insights. Now it's my pleasure to hand back over to Clark to open up for the panel.
Thanks so much, Christian. And we're really, really excited about this panel. So let's get this rolling. We have 4 guests today, and I'll just introduce each one by one and let them kick things off with a brief opening statement of 2 to 3 minutes so that we have enough time then for discussion, and then as well your questions. If you joined us late, we will be using Slido to vote or propose and or upvote questions. So please get active as we get going in the discussion. Please put your questions in there. We will definitely try, if we have time in the last quarter hour, to pull those in and make it an open discussion. First speaker up, since we have the French presidency, we thought who better to kick things off than someone working in the French government on the Digital Markets Act and the digital agenda. So our first speaker is Monsieur Mathieu Weill. He's the head of the Digital Economy Department at the French Ministry of Economic Affairs. And Monsieur Weill is also, of course, no stranger to the internet or the digital economy. Those of you who know the .fr domain name have, of course, been seeing a half a decade of his work. He was the person working as the CEO for, I think, 12 years of AFNIC, the domain entity there. And since 2017, Monsieur Weill is in the Digital Economy Department at the Ministry of Economic Affairs, and he's advising the Finance Minister, Bruno Le Maire, as well as the Secretary of State. And this is Monsieur Weill. With him, we have the person who really is driving a lot of the digital agenda within the ministry, especially European regulations. So we're really thrilled, Monsieur Weill, to have you here with us and hear your initial thoughts. Where do we stand? We're near the finish line with the DMA, and we're all on the edge of our seats to hear how the French presidency and the French government views the state of play right now. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the Embassy and the IEF for organizing this event. It's of course we're getting closer and closer to the finish line, and it's tempting for legislators in this context to regroup, speak between ourselves. But it's also very important to get inputs from the market, from other stakeholders in this at the end of these processes. So it's very useful that we have this conversation today, and I'm really looking forward to the exchange and discussions. Maybe a couple of points I can make as a starting point of the discussion. The first one is that the way we're seeing the digital agenda right now in Europe is that we have a historic opportunity to set a number of standards in terms of regulation, and the DMA is one of them. It's a major one, and we are very committed to advancing this as fast as possible as a presidency, obviously. At the same time, and I keep repeating it, it's extremely important that we don't forget that Europe is not only about regulation, it's also a place for innovation, and we need to invest more in this. And recently at the conference that we held in hybrid format, unfortunately, in February, about building Europe's digital sovereignty, I think we made major announcements, Franco-German, amongst other countries, by the way, about scaling up our companies, and the Scale Up Europe initiative is also a very important one. And everything we do with the regulation and the DMA, we need to keep in mind that we also need this second leg of European digital action about innovation. And the DMA, to focus on it, it's a major step. It's a major step because it's about creating the level playing field between the largest digital platforms and the ones that will become larger in the future, but are not at this point in time. And we know there are market foreclosure practices. We know there are a lot of obstacles in the way of developing European businesses. So really the purpose of the DMA is to enable more growth from European startups, from startups all across the world, actually, because we are in an open environment, very open to companies all across the world. And it's a DMA that is not focused on specific companies, but on setting the right framework for innovation and the level playing field I was talking about. 3 examples, I think, to start our debate. that show how the DMA is absolutely addressing what's important today and hopefully what will be important in the future. First, we want to open the gatekeepers ecosystem in order to provide end users with more choice and of course, startups or other providers to get a chance to address these customers. And that's more room for startups to offer their services. So that's number one. The second one, obviously, is the way on several marketplaces, large marketplaces, that smaller companies can be reassured that their data is not being appropriated by the marketplace operator, and that the competition between a marketplace that would also be a distributor or also be selling products on its marketplace is not doing unfair competition. And finally, it's been discussed a lot about app development. And of course, we want the DMA to be able to address a fair competition between app developers that are not part of the group of a gatekeeper and obviously the applications by this gatekeeper. And of course, we want to address the fairness and the proportionality of the fees in the app development sector. So that's 3 examples that I can give to keep the discussion. Obviously, and that was mentioned earlier, the text might not be perfect yet. It will maybe not be absolutely perfect and not be able to address everything. A trilogue is a very delicate discussion where we are, the Parliament and the Council, we all have our mandate. We are obviously trying to find a compromise that works, find it fast. And we are very much, at least on the French presidency, but I'm sure in the Parliament it's the same, eager to hear about what the status of the text is from the perception of players in the market in order to make it as good as possible. That would be it for introduction. I hope I wasn't too long.
Super. Thank you very much, Monsieur Weill. Well, you guys have a huge agenda, so it took some time, and we appreciate it. We look forward to the discussion in just a minute. But next up, we'll have another opening statement from another one of our guests on the panel, which is Dr. Andreas Schwab. He is a member of the European Parliament in the EPP group. There he is. Hello to Brussels or Strasbourg. I think you're in Brussels right now.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, there we go. A couple of words for those who aren't familiar with Dr. Schwab. Aside from being a member of the Subcommittee on Letters and the member of the Conference of Delegation Chairs, most salient for our talk today, of course, is that he is a member of the Committee on the Internal Market and Consumer Protection, IMCO as it's known. And on that committee, Dr. Schwab is the rapporteur for the Digital Markets Act. So we are now talking to the member of Parliament through whom the voice of Parliament, if you will, and the ideas of Parliament flowed. Once the Commission made its proposal for what a Digital Markets Act should be, along came Parliament and had its say, and Dr. Schwab had a gigantic task ahead of him to try to moderate a ton of amendments and a lot of opinions, potentially a lot of improvements, fingers crossed. And Dr. Schwab, we're really thrilled for you to join us today and would be really keen to hear your assessment. Where do we stand on the Digital Markets Act right now? What are for you the key elements? Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for your kind invitation to have me here in that delighted sort of people that have been working in the last months hard on the Digital Markets Act. As you have been already rightly outlining, we are faced with the situation that in Council at the moment we are seeing the French presidency doing an excellent job in convincing the 26 other members to understand why the European Parliament has a very strong position on this. And we are discussing with the French in the trialogue meetings here in the Brussels surrounding about where we can find common ground to make sure that we make the best out of the Digital Markets Act, for which we have been waiting now for more than 8 years. And you may remember, and that always should be our starting point, that the European Parliament in 2014 has asked the European Commission to start some sort of exercise to consider as to whether also further tools in competition policy should be used to reopen the digital single market again, because it was already clear at that moment in time that too many bottlenecks have been controlled by companies that are nowadays called gatekeeper. And these bottlenecks are app stores, they are attention-driven tools in social media, they are whatever you may imagine, like a search engine or whatever. And these bottlenecks have made the digital single market to become an area where, unfortunately, partly innovation has not been anymore the driver. And therefore, I'm very grateful to Mr. Weill to mention that this is here not about regulation and bureaucracy. It's about innovation and new possibilities for companies in the digital single market and also for users. And we have been seeing a growing number of companies that were innovative but have been just bought by the gatekeepers to destroy existing competition fields. And that is something that we want to get rid of, because we believe, under the social market economy principles, that a fair market is a market where there is no monopoly, where there is no oligopoly. And it's also important in the context of our idea of a society in Europe. And it was great to hear from the starting speaker of the App Association that they said France is our best neighbor. Absolutely. And we want to be the best neighbor for France, because we share nearly all of the key values in a modern society. Our fundamental laws, our constitutions are interpreted in a very similar way. We want to have openness, transparency, and freedom. And these principles have to be supported also by this growing number of companies that take an awful lot of attention, of media attention, of journalism, of information, and like that we have really to get it right after having waited for 8 years. Now, to come to some sort of examples, I will not be as precise as Mr. Weill, but I would like to make very clear that for us, the Digital Markets Act is more than just looking backwards to competition cases where the European Commission has maybe won or has maybe won a bit. We want to really open a system in which there is a possibility of coexistence of gatekeepers and smaller companies, but both have to subscribe to very strong market principles, to competition, and to make sure that we achieve that contestability of markets, which in the long run is also the best for consumer welfare. Like that, I would like to mention that we believe that the key principles of the DMA are, first of all, the change of burden of proof. I just a call with the important colleagues in the European Commission that for the enforcement, responsible for the enforcement of competition policy. And we agree that the key driver of the Digital Markets Act will be the change of burden of proof. It's not anymore up to the European Commission to prove a dominance. It's not anymore about the European Commission to prove the market size and the concrete structure of the market. It's not anymore up to the European Commission to prove that there was a market that has been lost by another company because of a gatekeeper. All this will be passed in the future with the DMA. There will be a rule under Article 5 and an obligation under Article 6, and an obligation not to circumvent both of them in Article 6a. And like that, the European Commission has a much stronger toolbox to enforce fair competition. And to get this right, we need a mixture of flexibility and of strengths. And this strength in Europe is normally done with the European Commission, because the trust of member states, and I'm sure that the French presidency at the moment is confronted with that impression, the trust that all 27 member states have is with the European Commission. You may sometimes regret that, but it's like that. Especially the bigger member states may regret that sometimes. And for that reason, the enforcement of the DMA in the version of the Parliament is done with the European Commission only, to avoid any misunderstandings, to avoid any confrontation or wrongdoings. It's all placed in the hands of the European Commission. And the European Commission will have to apply these rules in the best manner. But to get there, obviously, we need then also the manpower in the European Commission, because these rules are important, but there are no good rules if they are not perfectly enforced. And I think that Emmanuel Macron is always making a very good point by saying that the European countries defend their sovereignty together. But if they do this together, it's also clear that they don't need any more the manpower at national level in specific areas, but that we can pool it at European level. And at the moment, this doesn't happen in the area of competition. And therefore, I've written a letter to the Minister of State, Clément Beaune, making sure that the French presidency takes note of the fact that we will need in DG, in the European Commission, but not only in DG competition, that we will need more than 220 people. Sure that the enforcement of these laws, of the Digital Markets Act and of the Digital Services Act, is in the end done in the way as all the startup community is expecting. Because what we want is that is as interesting as in the US, and innovation has always been the European Union, and that this innovation is not being bought by killer acquisitions, but it's brought to the market, brought to consumers, and brought to users that then can show or can prove that these companies are as interesting as others, and that we get a real and a much more exciting market in digital, because we all know that the future will be digital, not only in shopping, but also in health and in other areas. And to get it right, we need the best ideas to be used in the interest of our societies. And for that reason, self-preferencing should not be anymore the case. We need a very strong message of fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory behaviors in app stores and other bottlenecks. And all this together is, from our point of view, ensured with the text that the European Parliament has voted for. And therefore, we push the French presidency to convince the other members of the Council to accept our proposal and to make the DMA a really forward-looking law. Like that, I hope that I've been giving you a bit of an insight for the time being, and I'm looking forward for our discussion later. Thank you so much.
Super. Thanks so much, Dr. Schwab. And you jumped right into so many subjects. I think you actually answered one of the questions that we had as we were going there. Jan-Hendrik Kunze was asking in the chat about killer acquisitions. So it's great to already in real time get your thoughts on that. We do agree that that is one of the ways in which so much market concentration actually came to be over the last decade, because no one was really stopping anything. Our third speaker for the panel is Daniel Enke, who is the head of public affairs at Zalando. Here I would also, before Daniel kicks things off, note that Irene Zafaratu was actually going to be speaking today for Zalando, and unfortunately she couldn't make it. And Daniel has jumped in her stead, which of course has now left us with what optically is a manel. And so I'd like to apologize to our viewers and participants. It was not planned to have 4 men here right now on your screen. So nevertheless, we're delighted, Daniel, for you to be here with us. For those of you who are familiar with Daniel, he's been the head of public affairs at Zalando now for 3.5 years. And Zalando, of course, many know, is perhaps the largest e-commerce site in Europe, founded here in Berlin. And Daniel, you can clarify that for me in a moment, but we're really thrilled to have you with us. And of course, Zalando has several issues related to the DMA that are of particular interest, because you are no longer a startup, you are a scale-up, and your size, as I think you'll also address, is potentially one of the problems that Zalando has with the DMA. So Daniel, we're thrilled to have you with us, and interested to hear your first quick take on the DMA. Daniel, I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can.
I was on mute. I don't know why.
There you go.
Thank you, Clark. Anyway, so I can say that again, what I just said. Thank you, Clark. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for inviting us here to that esteemed panel. We are not the largest e-commerce player in Europe, so let me just clarify this. We've been founded in 2008, actually. That's true. So we have been a startup and have been living throughout the Berlin startup ecosystem, which we have been a vital part of since then. Now we have 16,500 employees across Europe, 46 million customers who buy once per year. So that's an important number in this context. People from 140 nations work here, and we have a GMV from 2020 10.7 billion euros, which in comparison to some other e-commerce players, if I name Amazon with 386 billion revenue per year in 2021, it's really a different size. We're only active in Europe, and so we are kind of a child of the European single market and enjoying all its benefits, if you so will. So that's why we really enjoy being and operating here in Europe. So when we look at the DMA, we have been supportive from the very start. And we have been supportive also of the renewal of the German Competition Act 2 years ago, which we helped there. And the DMA is something, when we look at its intention, that is exactly right. And I can only second what Monsieur Weill and also Mr. Schwab said before. It's behavioral rules, setting behavioral rules for unavoidable giants, both for customers and consumers and business users. That's really something that we look forward to seeing enforced and in place. So we are supportive because we also see ourselves as a business user of some of these players, and hope for enjoying the benefits of the DMA later when it's in place. So right now, I think that's also been mentioned. We are at a crucial crossroads almost to get this thing right. Mr. Schwab has also mentioned that. We think the same way in that sense, that we want to especially highlight the scope. I think that has also been mentioned by Christian Miele at the very beginning. It's important to target the right players. It's important to really make it about innovation and to not target by accident or on purpose the wrong players. And when we look at some of the definitions in the annex, especially, Mr. Schwab knows what I'm talking about. There might be the danger, or we are worried about some risk of creating collateral damages, or at least legal uncertainty that might lead to a loss of innovation or a loss of power to create innovation with some European players. In our case, that's especially the definition of the active end users, or the question: what kind of user do you count in order to look at the size of a company? And in the current state of play in the annex of the DMA, there's one example missing in our point of view, and that's the example of transaction-based business models. So customers who buy should be taken into consideration and should be stated explicitly as that, and not just visitors, as it is sort of ambiguously phrased in the current annex. So that's why we are still active on the DMA and still try to convince legislators and call upon legislators here to get this thing right and take the time to look at this industry e-commerce specific problem that we're facing here. So basically, the model that we are trying to give out here is follow the money, not the clicks. So adding another example here would be our call. I just dropped that here to maybe get the discussion going. I will stop here also in the interest of time, and I'm happy to reiterate and go deeper.
Super, Daniel. Thank you so much. And you did put your finger in the wound, as our German friends do say. This is one of the key elements, is getting this definition of a gatekeeper, or the definition of an active user, right, especially because we have the DSA and the DMA to try and reconcile here or harmonize. So after we hear from Wolfgang Oels, I do look forward to jumping in and trying to tease a little more information out on that subject. Our fourth speaker, the last one we'll kick things off with, is Dr. Wolfgang Oels. He is the COO of Ecosia, another Berlin startup, now scale up, Europe's biggest search engine, the search engine that plants trees. For those of you who don't know Wolfgang, he's an industrial engineer and actually has a PhD in energy economics. He's a former McKinsey consultant, worked in the solar industry in California, and since 2016 has been the COO at Ecosia, which is really, I think, one of the poster children, if you will, for how a scale-up can run into big trouble when trying to compete with one of the key gatekeepers, or several of them, Google and Bing. So Wolfgang, we're really looking forward to your point of view on the Digital Markets Act, where you think we stand and what issues you perhaps would like to see especially addressed. The floor is yours, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And yes, I would like to start with congratulating Dr. Schwab and the European Parliament. I think they hit the nail on the. Can you hear me? Yeah, they hit the nail on the head with, I think, both of the two fundamental issues that we still see, and one is about default settings. Yeah, they are the key to market share. And 95% of Google users have never actively selected Google. Yeah, so we need choice screens in order to give a level playing field to everyone. The second amendment touches on ad platforms. Yeah, so Google Ads is the world's most valuable marketplace. It's behind Google's $1.8 trillion valuation. And it's a marketplace that, unlike other much less important marketplaces, is closed, it's intransparent, it's completely irregulated, and it's rigged. We know it's rigged. Yeah? We know of Project Enke, we know of Project Jedi Blue. We know that the European Publishers Council just filed a complaint again, or several complaints against it. And there are probably many other ways we don't know how it is rigged yet. Yeah? But I think I congratulate the European Parliament to address these fundamental points, and I hope that I can't wait, for them to get into life. Yeah, we must not miss this opportunity to solve that. I'll be very brief, so we have more time for discussion.
Thanks so much, Wolfgang. We actually have lots of good questions already pouring in, and in the interest of time, if it's okay, I will already take some inspiration from some of the questions from our audience to kick things off in the panel. We have a question related to enforcement, because Mr. Schwab, you mentioned it, several of you have spoken about its importance. In fact, just this week, I know that the German economics minister Habeck was visiting Andreas of the cartel office, and they put out a manifesto for how they want to address the market, and enforcement, and raising the budget for enforcement was actually a key element there. So it's clear that even at the national level, enforcement is recognized. So I would put the question to Mr. Schwab and Mr. Weill, if either one of you or both of you would like to quickly address it. What role will the national competition authorities play vis-a-vis the European Commission? Dr. Schwab, you mentioned right now the plan is that the EU Commission is running things. Perhaps that's a reaction to the fact that we've seen how GDPR enforcement has gone awry, one could perhaps say, with our friends in Ireland. So how do you balance the fact that nations have their own competition laws and want to enforce, and we're also trying to get a pan-European regimen going here?
Well, let me be very clear. Obviously, we have a problem in the European Union with application of decentralized decision-making. I don't want to disappoint anyone here, but seen from a European perspective, all the areas where we are facing troubles, unfortunately, are areas of policy where member states are responsible. That doesn't mean that it's all the member states that pose these problems, but it means that if there is only one member state who does not want to follow a common line, you can create a big disorder. Still, my proposal has foreseen at the very beginning that we should try to use the existing cooperation tools from the competition policy network that we have been setting up some years ago. I myself was a rapporteur, and I think this goes very well. However, having said that, it's obvious that we cannot copy and paste exactly from competition policy into the Digital Markets Act, because competition policy is enshrined in the treaties in Article 101 and 102, whilst the Digital Markets Act is based on a different legal base. So that is something that we had to consider. And I think for some colleagues, it has meant that also the Digital Markets Act has to be shaped a bit differently. But still, there was and there is a chance to include better national competition authorities. Now, why is that so complicated? because first, there is the political momentum of those who say it should be done at European level. But secondly, and we always come back to the first point that I was making. Under competition policy, we have a common law book in the European Union that is applied by the European Commission and by the 27 national authorities. But the procedural law on the same law book is different 27 times. If you take the European level, 28 times. And for that reason, unfortunately, we cannot make use of the full synergies that we have, because the national procedural laws make it difficult, for example, for a French prosecutor to find the proofs that the European Commission can use at the Brussels court, and the Germans, they look for other proofs because in the Landgericht in Düsseldorf, that the procedures are again differently. And that makes, unfortunately, the synergies that we can base our work on still a bit limited. We have to improve this, because I think competition policy will, after the DMA and after digital companies having entered further the competition policy field in competition authorities' work, they will be the majority. And therefore, we also have to aim already now at the common set of procedural laws so that we can make use all over Europe of the same procedures and the same laws. That would strengthen the enforcement, and it would also make easier that proofs that are found in Madrid can be as easily used in Paris as in Berlin. That would be an important step. We are not yet there. At the moment, we face the political trouble with colleagues that prefer the European Commission to be the only authority to apply Digital Markets Act enforcement.
Thank you. Mr. Weill, where does the trilogue stand right now on this issue? Are we close to finding our way?
Well, of course, if I'm sure Dr. Schwab is about to convince his colleagues in the parliament that a council position is the one to follow there, so it's probably very close to conclusion. But joking aside, I think this is obviously a very important issue, and actually, before the French presidency, this is not appropriate for a presidency, but when we were only one member state among 27 others, we formed with Germany, France, and the Netherlands a small group that we called the Friends of an Effective DMA. So just to demonstrate that this focus on effectivity, on enforcement has been in the forefront from the start, because we all know how we can ruin a good regulation by just not thinking about it. And there are three different aspects of it that are of concern. Of course, there's the governance and how integrated it is. And I think the DMA is a great occasion, and we will make great progress in greater integration of the policy and applying it in a uniform basis across Europe without having the fragmentation that has been of course, a serious issue. We're making progress in the DMA. There's also progress in the DSA. I think Europe is making great strides forward there. Although we can always argue about whether it's enough or not enough. The second aspect with governance is the resources. And clearly, there's a challenge here for the Commission to put enough resources to address all the issues that are being tackled by the DMA. And that is where the Council is saying, well, why not? I mean, why would the Commission be the only one when we could also rely on the strengths of some of the national authorities, which are educated and they have resources and a willingness to do so. So there's been improvements to the text of the Commission to enable greater cooperation with the national authorities in order for us to unite our strengths in making the DMA more enforceable. And finally, and that's an aspect that still remains to be discussed, where we are waiting for proposal from the Commission, there's an aspect of skills. The DMA is not your typical competition case. You need a lot of legal skills. You need the policy skills, you need the technical skills. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges that we need to address as soon as possible, is how we can monitor the algorithm. How do we dig into the codes? How do we address the discrimination or the bias to self-referencing? How do we demonstrate it in some cases? although there's this change on the burden of proof, we need these technical skills. And to give an example, in France, we've created a task force that is mutualizing all the technical skills on data science, addressing platform regulations. And certainly that's the kind of approach that will need to be set up as well if we want to enforce the DMA 100%.
Super, yeah. Just a quick thought perhaps from Wolfgang or Daniel on this issue, because you are the guys who are working in several markets and have to perhaps decide, okay, am I going to challenge behavior in this market or that market? As an American, I'm familiar with sort of court shopping sometimes, where you could potentially bring a suit in a state where you think it might give you the best chance for success. How do you guys who are trying to work across different nation states in the market, how do you deal with this? Is this a problem for you? Or right now, I mean, I know you're focused on different elements of getting the DMA right, but surely this is also an issue for you too. I know you're speaking to national competition authorities as well as at the EU level. So how do you try and handle this on the other side of the table, one bringing a case potentially?
I'll be brief. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm not a lawyer. I would like not to think about that question. And by the way, so we have chosen to also with our taxes. Yeah, we just pay taxes here in Germany, and we don't look for a Caribbean island to move our headquarters there. I'd like, honestly, I would like to not have to think about that question really.
Daniel, then perhaps do you guys have a different? You have perhaps more people in your policy team to try and figure out how to deal with this.
Yeah, but I think we can leave it at we are following the rules as we can, and that has been the business conduct so far for us, and it has proven to work well. But let me make maybe one other point, because Monsieur Weill stated that they are ramping up in the French government resources to look at how the DMA would be enforced. There, we are also on the other side of the game. If the DMA is not gotten right, and the wrong companies, or too many companies, or companies who are not unavoidable gatekeepers and have enjoyed the benefits of being such an unavoidable gatekeeper, also commercially in the past, need to deal with the rules and not just following the rules and not apply self-referencing, for example, which wouldn't be a problem for us, but following everything and going through all the processes to ensure compliance is a massive task for a company. And that's something we should prevent from happening to the wrong companies. That's just here also from the other perspective, from the industry perspective, on the enforcement side.
Daniel, actually, you raised a question that one of our viewers also has raised, Celeste, asking if there are any resources available for SMEs to try and manage the complex legal requirements, because this is a huge problem. You hear Wolfgang says, I don't have time to even try and deal with this. Is there anything out there? Because, the ecosystem is full of startups and scale-ups who might not have a policy person or might not have the resources to try and address this. Is there anything at the European level, perhaps thoughts of the French presidency or at the parliament level to try and create some kind of programs or help for all the SMEs out there? Monsieur Weill? Yeah.
Now, maybe just a point of clarification that the DMA is designed, and the obligations of the DMA are focused on a very limited number of companies, the largest ones. So if you're an SME, there is no new obligation from the DMA for you. If you want to ignore it, ignore it. It will open opportunities for you to engage with these gatekeepers. It will not create any burden of any kind for you in terms of compliance. And of course, I understand the Daniel's position that he thinks if your company might feel concerned about becoming a gatekeeper, then of course it's another story. But it comes when you have already achieved a significant number of successes, and if you're the small SME, there's nothing to fear on that side. And I think that it's just important, because this is actually, it's not easy in the European legislations to have everyone agree about the fact that we're doing a regulation focused on the largest players. Usually you do regulation for everyone, and this is focused on the largest players, and this is actually one of the very important aspects of the text, and how broad or narrow the scope is obviously a point of discussion between the Parliament and the Council at this point. But it's whatever it is, it's not going to reach the SMEs or the startups. It's focused on the largest ones, and there's the discussion about how you count users and so on, which is important, but it's not creating administrative burden for the smaller ones.
Super. And Dr. Schwab, I know that you have been at the forefront of trying to keep the definition tight, if you will, to keep it to a small circle of companies in terms of the scope, because we are trying to address the gigantic market failure and really hit the gatekeepers, as you would say. We had a question from our participants along these lines, browsers as part of the DMA. Monsieur Weill and Dr. Schwab, should we add browsers to our list of gatekeepers?
Well, we cannot do the trialogue here. I think the French presidency has a very reasonable position on a lot of points, but they are also fighting for the common position that the Council has taken. And I think that we can very easily conclude that a lot of services where colleagues or people are concerned at the moment about, they are in any event in intermediation service, and all intermediation services are covered with the Digital Markets Act. So it's a bit a blame game that doesn't change anything, because in the end, I think with the scope that is in the law book already foreseen by the Commission, and will be there also with the Council or with the Parliament's text, these services are covered. It's just a bit of a beauty contest, and we don't need to make the beauty contest here in TV.
Wolfgang, perhaps from you, because I know that Ecosia reaches most of its users through the browsers, and or I know you have a plugin, and if a browser perhaps changes its code overnight, you might lose a large number of your users. So this is kind of a life and death issue for you. What do you think needs to happen to make sure that this issue gets resolved when the DMA is finalized?
Yeah, so again, I'm not a lawyer, yeah. So, but to me, the question with the browsers should be, are gatekeepers? I think it's obvious. Yes, of course they are. Yeah, I think every one of us currently takes part in this conference through a browser. Yeah, and every time I use the internet, I do that through the browser. Yes, it's the main gate for most of us all the time. Yeah, or most of the time into the internet, and there's a tremendous power, yeah, by owning this browser, especially. I mean, you choose. You can see what people do, yeah, but you can also. I mean, what we see is that Google, for instance, shows users who have chosen to switch to Ecosia. They show them a window after a while, showing, hey, why don't you want to switch back to Google? Yeah, it's a crazy power that those gatekeepers own, and they can use that power, yeah, to and especially if they have a quasi monopoly somewhere to enforce and build up their monopolies elsewhere. So I think it. And I trust that this very important entity will be regulated well in the DMA.
Super, yeah. We're nearing the end of our time, so I would maybe, before I throw one final question out, I guess just a bit of reviewing. I think we've had a really interesting discussion and heard a lot from our speakers, especially Monsieur Weill. It was really thrilling to hear many of the elements that you talked about that are key in the way that you envision the DMA coming to pass. You know the fact that we needed an open ecosystem to deal with the gatekeepers. It was also interesting, we didn't have time to address it, this notion that the data that's on a platform, that perhaps a company that's providing a platform needs to be stopped from potentially using that data against one of its own customers. We see a lot of cases in the European ecosystem of that. It was also interesting to hear you talk about app fairness and proportionality there. That's a huge issue that we're seeing on both sides of the Atlantic as well. From Daniel, it was really, I think everyone hears loud and clear Zalando's thoughts on this issue of scope and how we define a user, because if we define a user and ultimately European scale-ups are being hit first with enforcement suits rather than the giant companies we all know are the ones really abusing the market, then we really do have problems. And also, Wolfgang, I think everyone is very, very familiar with the self-preferencing issue, which is really a key to Ecosia's go-to-market, because Android self-preferencing, a Google search, really already it puts you guys behind the 8 ball. So a final thought, because we're nearing the end here, is the one of timing. Ambassador Descôtes said we want to wrap this up by the end of the French presidency, and she actually said the month June, I heard. Many of us who follow French politics are quite aware that there is a presidential campaign perhaps kicking off very soon. And so it was always unofficially said that we need to try and get the DMA actually wrapped up by the end of March, throwing that out there. It's really important for all of us, and Daniel and Wolfgang, I think I speak for you. This is really some of the most important legislation, and Dr. Schwab, you mentioned, since 2014, we've been waiting for this, so we need to get it right. And I really, if I could speak on behalf of the ecosystem to Monsieur Weill and the presidency, we really hope that the time and care is taken to get it right before hurriedness happens to wrap things up in time for potentially some French domestic politics. Could you give us an idea of the timing right now, Monsieur Weill? Where do we stand? Are we still working towards June, or are we potentially working towards March? What comes next? Because it's really important to get it right, as well as get it out on time.
And there's no question that getting it right is the top priority for everyone. Having said that, delaying for tactical reasons would also be totally unacceptable from the ecosystem point of view. And so currently I understand there's a schedule on the trilogues for a couple more political meetings. It would extend probably until April, and we'll see where we are. If things are ready, not ready, if the political willingness is necessary to close a negotiation, and we'll see where we are. But the French presidency is there until the end of June, and will be committed until the end of June, whatever happens.
Dr. Schwab, any thoughts on that as well? I think you're also deep in the trilogue process.
Well, the European Parliament is here until 2024 in May, and we are sure that we will be able to close this before. We have been waiting for too much time so that we don't have any time to lose. But in the end, what counts is an enforceable DMA and not something which is just a compromise. But I'm very confident that we will manage this. Also, thanks to very hard work that is done around Mr. Weill in his office in Paris and also in Brussels. And therefore, we will work hard to make it a reality as soon as possible.
Super. I couldn't think of any more optimistic words to close on then. And to thank our 4 speakers here, Daniel Enke, Mathieu Weill, Dr. Andreas Schwab, and Wolfgang Oels. It was a really fascinating discussion, a really important topic. Thanks also to all of you at home or in your office, and those of you who posted questions. We really, you can tell that this is a really important issue. And also thanks to Her Excellency, the Ambassador Descôtes, for kicking things off and co-hosting us with her team, and to Christian Miele and the entire Startup Federation. On behalf of Professor Pflüger from the IEF and the IEF team, I'd like to thank you all for watching. And perhaps the final parting thought, it was really great to hear Monsieur Weill also mention that we're not going to just regulate our way to digital sovereignty. I think it's very fitting, potentially, that the French presidency brings the DMA and the DSA across the finish line, because no one, in my view, has done more for the European ecosystem in terms of financing, in terms of just the signal and leadership that this is a priority than President Macron and the entire French government. So it would, I think, be very fitting to have a key piece of regulation come to pass during the presidency of a country which is also showing the way to grow startups and scale-ups the right way. So we wish you all as a glückliche Hand, as our German friends would say, to the French presidency. And thanks to our speakers also for being here with us today. And thanks to all of you. And hopefully within a couple months, or at least 2024 at the latest, Dr. Schwab, we'll have a DMA we can all be proud of. Thanks, you guys.